Elara Voss stood in the grand ballroom, her silver-gray eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of disdain and wariness. The chandeliers above cast fractured light over the sea of guests, their laughter and clinking glasses a cacophony that grated against her nerves. She had agreed to attend this wedding, his wedding, the one he'd insisted on only because her mother had begged her to be there for him. Now, as she adjusted the strap of her emerald gown, she wondered why she'd ever think a man like Kael Thorne needed her blessing. He was the kind of man who believed the world owed him everything, and the kind of man who had a reputation for leaving women broken in his wake. The music swelled, a waltz that felt too elegant for the storm brewing in her chest. She spotted him at the head of the room, standing beside the bride, a woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Kael Thorne. Tall, imposing, his ink-black hair swept back from a face that looked carved from stone. He was watching her. Not with the casual interest of a stranger, but with the calculating gaze of someone who had studied her from afar. Her stomach twisted. How did he even know she was here? Elara, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the bride's mother, her face flushed with wine. Kael wants to speak to you. He says it's important. The words were a warning, but Elara felt herself being pulled toward him like a moth to a flame. When she reached him, he turned, his expression unreadable. You're the one who left the gala early last week, he said, his voice low, the kind that made her spine stiffen. The one who refused to answer my calls. I didn't know you were the one who hired the security firm, she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I didn't know you were the one who sent them to my apartment last night. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. He leaned in, close enough that she could see the faint scar tracing his jawline. You don't get to be surprised, Elara. I've been watching you for weeks. You're the only one who could answer the question I've been asking myself for years. Before she could respond, the bride's mother cleared her throat. The reception is starting, dear. You should be with the other guests. Elara turned on her heel, but not before catching the glint of something in his pocket, a photograph, perhaps, and the way his fingers tightened around it as she walked away. She didn't look back, but the weight of his gaze lingered on her shoulders like a curse. 2 hours later, she stood in the marble corridor outside the ballroom, her heels echoing against the floor like a countdown to something she couldn't name. The guests had long since dispersed, leaving only the faint scent of champagne and the distant hum of the string quartet. Her fingers curled around the edge of the doorframe, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Kael Thorne had vanished after their confrontation, but the way he'd looked at her, like she was a riddle he was determined to solve, left her breathless. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the voices from the adjacent room had drawn her in. He's not going to let her go, the bride's mother was saying, her voice trembling. You think he's in love with her? He's using her. He's always used women, and he'll do it again. Elara's stomach turned. The idea that Kael Thorne could be the kind of man who played games with women's hearts was almost laughable. Almost. But then the other voice spoke, low, measured, and unmistakably Kael's. I don't need to use her, Clarice. I need her to answer the question. And I will not leave this wedding until I do. The words sent a chill down her spine. What question? What could he possibly want from her that was worth dragging her into this nightmare? She turned sharply, her heels clicking as she walked toward the exit. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp. She needed to get out of there, to escape the suffocating weight of his presence. But as she reached the car, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Kael Thorne stood in the parking lot, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. He was watching her. Not with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator, but with something else, something almost human. You're running again, Elara, he said, his voice cutting through the night. But this time, you're not going to make it. She left the event, took a cab home. The ride was silent, the driver's eyes in the rearview mirror a reminder that she was not alone. Her apartment building loomed ahead, its dark windows like closed wounds. She fumbled with her keys, her breath unsteady. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside, the silence of her home a cruel contrast to the chaos of the night. But the silence didn't last. A car door slammed in the courtyard below. Her heart stopped. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow. He's here, the thought sent a jolt of fear through her. She had told herself she wouldn't let him find her again, that she would vanish into the shadows and never look back. But he had found her. The sound of footsteps echoed up the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Her fingers curled around the knife on the kitchen counter. If he comes inside, she wasn't sure what she'd do, but she knew she'd fight. The doorbell rang. Her breath hitched. She stared at the door, her mind a war zone of panic and curiosity. What does he want? The question burned in her chest like a brand. She opened the door a crack, just enough to see him standing there, his silhouette sharp against the night. You're not going to run again, Elara, he said, his voice a low rumble. Not tonight. The words hung between them, a challenge, a promise. And as he stepped closer, the light from the hallway illuminating the scar on his jaw, she knew, this was only the beginning. Elara's fingers trembled as she clutched the apartment key, the cold metal biting into her palm. The elevator doors had just closed, sealing her in the sterile silence of the 12th floor lobby. Kael Thorne stood there, his silhouette sharp against the security camera's red glow, his tailored charcoal suit blending into the shadows. His presence was a physical weight, pressing against her ribs as if he'd already breached her walls. Why is he here? The question echoed in her skull, louder than the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. She had spent the past hour replaying their first encounter, the way his voice had sliced through her thoughts in the boardroom, his icy gaze lingering on her like a blade. Now, he was here, in her personal space, and she could feel the air between them crackle with something primal, something dangerous. You're late, he said, his voice a low rumble that made her spine stiffen. The words were a challenge, a taunt. She wanted to scream that she wasn't late, she'd been running for weeks, dodging his shadow. But her throat tightened, the words trapped behind a wall of fear. I wasn't aware I had an appointment, she replied, her voice colder than she intended. His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You do now. He stepped closer, the scent of his cologne, cedar and something sharp, like blood, filling the air. Her breath hitched. She wanted to turn and run, but her legs felt rooted to the marble floor. I need your help, he said, the words slow, deliberate. And I'm not leaving until you give it. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. She could feel the walls closing in, the lobby shrinking until there was no escape. Her mind raced. Asterisk, what did he know? How had he found her? Asterisk, you don't get to make demands, she said, her voice trembling. Not after what you did to my father. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the silence that followed was suffocating. His expression didn't change, but something in his stance shifted, a predator recognizing prey. Your father was a fool, he said softly. And you, he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. You're a Voss. That makes us family. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Family. The word tasted like poison. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the floor as she strode toward the stairwell. This isn't over, she said over her shoulder, her voice a whisper. Not by a long shot. 2 hours later, she stood in the private rooftop lounge of Voss Industries, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city. The air was thick with the scent of bourbon and something darker, something unspoken. Kael Thorne had followed her, of course. She had known he would. The meeting had been a trap, but she had no choice. Her father's legacy was a curse, and Kael was the only one who could untangle it. You're wasting my time, she said, her voice clipped as she poured herself a drink. The glass was ice-cold against her fingers, a poor substitute for the fire burning in her chest. Kael leaned against the bar, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. You think I'm the enemy? He asked. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. She turned to face him, her silver-gray eyes flashing. You destroyed my father's life. You left him to rot in a prison cell while I watched. Her voice cracked on the last word. He was a criminal, Elara. A traitor to his bloodline. Kael's voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was a steel beneath it. And you? You're a Voss. That makes you my responsibility. The words sent a jolt through her. Responsibility. It was a word she hadn't heard in years, not since her father's fall. You don't get to play savior, she said, her voice rising. You don't get to, I get to stop you from making the same mistakes. Kael stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Your father's debts weren't just financial, Elara. They were personal. She froze. What are you talking about? Her voice was barely a whisper. Kael's expression darkened. Your mother. She was one of us. A Voss. And she died because of what your father did. The words struck her like a physical blow. Her mother. The woman she had never known, the ghost that had haunted her childhood. You knew her, she asked, her voice trembling. Kael's gaze softened, but only for a moment. I loved her. The confession hung between them, raw and unfiltered. And I watched her die because of your father's greed. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like lead. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Kael stepped closer, his voice a low rumble. Because I need you, Elara. And I won't let you walk away again. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to hate him, to despise him for what he had done. But there was something else, something deeper, something that made her heart ache. You don't get to choose who I am, she said, her voice trembling. Not anymore. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she strode toward the exit. This isn't over, she said over her shoulder, her voice a whisper. Not by a long shot. By the time she reached the city streets, her breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. The night was thick with rain, the streets slick with water that reflected the neon glow of the city. She hailed a taxi, her hands trembling as she pulled the door shut. The driver was an older man with a weathered face and tired eyes. Where to, miss? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her mind was a storm of questions, of memories. Asterisk her mother. Kael. The legacy of the Voss family. Asterisk she had spent her life running from the shadows of her father's past, but now, it seemed, the past had caught up to her. Anywhere but here, she whispered. The driver didn't ask again. The taxi pulled into traffic, the city blurring past the windows. She stared at her reflection in the glass, her face pale, her eyes haunted. What had Kael told her? The words echoed in her mind. Asterisk your mother. She was one of us. A Voss. And she died because of what your father did. Asterisk she had never known her mother, never seen a photograph, never heard a name. And yet, Kael had loved her. Had he loved her? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to believe him, but the man who had stood in her apartment lobby, who had spoken to her with such quiet intensity, was a stranger. A predator. A man who had hunted her father and now, it seemed, her. The taxi came to a stop, and the driver turned to her. You're not the first Voss he's hunted, are you? The question was low, almost reverent. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She turned to face him, her silver-gray eyes wide with shock. What did you say? The driver didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the road, but his voice was steady. He's been hunting Vosses for years. Your father was just the first. I've seen him take others. Men, women, all of them gone by the time the sun rose. Elara's heart pounded. He's been hunting Vosses for years, the words hit her like a physical blow. Asterisk what else had he done? What else had she not known? Asterisk her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling. The driver didn't answer. He just stared ahead, his eyes reflecting the city's neon glow. Elara leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. Kael Thorne. The Voss legacy. Her mother. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one she wasn't sure she wanted to see. The taxi pulled away from the curb, and the city blurred past the windows. She could feel Kael's presence in every breath, in every heartbeat. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The taxi cab shuddered as the driver slammed the brakes, sending Elara's coffee sloshing over the rim of her cup. Her fingers tightened around the handle as the driver's voice cut through the rain-streaked windows. "You're not the first Voss he's hunted, are you?" The words hung in the air, thick as the humidity, as if the very walls of the cab were holding their breath. Elara's silver-gray eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where the reflection of her own face stared back, pale, trembling, and haunted by the name Kael Thorne. Her mind replayed the last 2 weeks, the way he had appeared at the art gallery, the way he had watched her from across the room, the way he had known her name before she had even spoken it. He was a ghost in her life, and now he was here, in the cab, his presence suffocating her. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window as she tried to steady herself. The driver's question gnawed at her, a worm in her mind. Had her mother been hunted? Had her grandmother? The thought made her stomach churn. She had always known Kael Thorne was dangerous, but now she understood, this wasn't just about her. It was about something deeper, something darker. The taxi lurched forward again, and through the rain, she caught a glimpse of his car, black and gleaming, parked outside her building. Her heart pounded in her chest. He was waiting for her. And she had no idea why. The penthouse suite was a fortress of glass and steel, its towering windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. Elara stood in the study, her back pressed against the heavy oak door as she listened to the sound of her own breathing. The study was filled with books, paintings, and the faint scent of aged wood, but none of it comforted her. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, and the only answer she had was the man who had cornered her in the taxi. Kael Thorne. She had seen him in the lobby, his presence radiating power and control, and now she was alone in the study, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what he wanted from her, but she knew one thing, she couldn't run from him anymore. The study was quiet, save for the sound of her own thoughts, and as she stepped forward, her foot caught on the edge of a rug, sending her sprawling to the floor. She gasped, her hand flying to her knee as she scrambled to her feet. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the way her heart was pounding. She turned around, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Kael. He wasn't there. But she could feel him, as if his presence was a shadow that clung to her every move. She took a deep breath and walked to the desk, her fingers brushing against the cool surface. The desk was cluttered with files, some of them marked with her name. She picked one up, her eyes scanning the pages. It was a file on her family, on her mother, on her grandmother. Her hands trembled as she read, the words blurring together. She had always known her family was wealthy, but this was different. This was dangerous. She looked up, her eyes scanning the room once more. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But as she turned around, her breath caught in her throat. Kael stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He was watching her, and for a moment, she felt like a mouse caught in the gaze of a predator. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Kael stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I could ask you the same question," he said, his voice low and smooth. "But I think I already know the answer." He took another step, and she felt the heat of his presence wash over her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. He was close now, so close that she could see the faint scar on his cheek, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. She was trapped, not by the walls of the study, but by the man standing before her. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, and she felt a shiver run through her. "You're afraid of me, aren't you?" he whispered. "I think I am," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes, something that looked like desire. "Good," he said. "Because I think I'm afraid of you, too." The hallway was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a single overhead light. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She had fled the study, slamming the door behind her, but Kael had followed. She could hear his footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate, each one sending a shiver down her spine. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, desire, confusion. She had never felt this way about anyone before, and it terrified her. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. She wanted to scream, but no sound would come. He was so close now, she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. "Don't run from me," he whispered, his voice low and smooth. "You know I won't let you go." She turned, her silver gray eyes locking with his, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He was so close now, his face mere inches from hers, and she could see the way his lips were parted, the way his breath was coming in slow, steady rhythm. She wanted to pull away, but her body refused to listen. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes, something that looked like longing. "Because I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I've been searching for you for a long time." He leaned in, his breath washing over her face, and for a moment, she thought she would kiss him. She wanted to, more than anything. But she couldn't. Not yet. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what you want from me." He stepped forward, his hands cupping her face, his fingers pressing gently against her skin. "I want you, Elara," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I've always wanted you." And then, he kissed her. It was a slow, deliberate kiss, full of promise and danger. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she pulled him closer. And for a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, lost in the dark. Elara's breath comes in shallow, uneven gasps as Kael's fingers curl around her wrist, his grip bruising but unrelenting. The taxi lurches forward, its engine growling as the city's neon lights blur into a feverish haze. His scent of cedar and something darker, something primal, fills the confined space, mingling with the acrid tang of rain on asphalt. She can still feel the heat of his mouth, the ghost of his kiss pressing against her lips in the dark, a temptation she should have resisted. Why did I let him touch me? The question coils in her mind, sharp as a blade. His voice is a low, velvet rasp against her ear. You ran from the rooftop, but you can't run from me, Elara. Her pulse thunders in her ears, a frantic rhythm that mirrors the storm outside. The taxi driver's reflection in the rearview mirror is a blur of shadow and light, but his words echo in her mind. You're not the first Voss he's hunted, are you? She had dismissed it then, but now the weight of those words settles in her gut like a stone. Her fingers tremble as she reaches for her bag, her hands brushing against something hard and angular. A file. Her name, scrawled in elegant script, glints in the dim light of the taxi's interior. Kael Thorne's handwriting, her breath catches. What is this? The taxi lurches to a stop, the driver's voice cutting through the haze. We're here, miss. The doors swing open, and the rain hammers down like 1,000 tiny needles. She stumbles out, the file clutched to her chest, her heart pounding. The streetlights flicker above her, casting long shadows that seem to stretch toward the penthouse door. Her feet move of their own accord, drawn to the library where the scent of old books and mahogany fills the air. The file burns in her hands as she crosses the threshold, her silver-gray eyes narrowing at the sight of the heavy mahogany desk. She slides the file open, her breath catching as she reads the words etched in Kael's precise, cold script, Elara Voss, wife of Kael Thorne. The room seems to shrink around her, the air thick with the weight of betrayal. Her hands shake as she flips to the next page, her eyes scanning the document until they land on the line that stops her breath. This marriage is not a choice. It is a debt. Her knees buckle, and she sinks to the floor, the file slipping from her hands. The sound of the paper hitting the floor is swallowed by the silence, but the echo of Kael's voice lingers. You ran from the rooftop, but you can't run from me, Elara. Her fingers dig into the carpet as if it might anchor her to reality. What debt? The question burns in her mind, but the answer eludes her. Her vision blurs, and the room spins, the walls closing in. She can't breathe. Why did he do this? The thought is a scream trapped in her throat. She needs answers, but the only thing she feels is the cold, unrelenting certainty that everything she thought she knew about Kael Thorne is a lie. Her hands clutch at her hair as she rises, the file still clutched in her trembling fingers. I have to find him. I have to know the truth. The thought is a fire in her veins, driving her forward. She runs, her heels pounding against the marble floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The study is just ahead, its door ajar, the light spilling out like a beacon. She stumbles inside, her eyes scanning the room until they land on the table where the wedding plans are spread out. Her hands freeze. The invitation is there, elegant and gilded, the words Elara Voss and Kael Thorne emblazoned across the front. Her stomach lurches. This is a trap. She turns, her back to the door, her heart hammering in her chest. He's here. The sound of footsteps echoes through the study, slow and deliberate. Her breath catches. No, she can't run. She won't run. She turns, her silver-gray eyes locking onto the figure in the doorway, and the world stops. The sound of Kael's footsteps is a slow, deliberate drumbeat in the study's silence. Elara's breath hitches as he steps into the room, his presence filling the space like a storm. His eyes, dark as the void between stars, lock onto hers, and for a moment, the world holds its breath. He's still wearing the tailored suit from the rooftop, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders like a second skin. His posture is rigid, his jaw clenched, but there's something in his gaze that sends a shiver down her spine, a mix of triumph and something darker, something she can't name. He knows, the thought is a blade in her chest. He knows about the file. He knows about the debt, her fingers curl into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. Why? The question is a whisper, but it's clear enough for him to hear. His lips curve into a slow, maddening smile. You found it, then. His voice is smooth, almost gentle, but there's a razor's edge to it. You always were a clever girl, Elara. Her throat tightens. Clever, the word feels like a taunt. What does that mean? She takes a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. What debt, Kael? What game are you playing? Her voice is steady, but her hands tremble at her sides. He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he steps closer, the air between them thick with unspoken words. You ran from the rooftop, but you can't run from me, Elara. His voice is a whisper now, a promise in the dark. You always belonged to me. Her breath catches. Belonged, the word is a punch to the gut. How long has he known? How long has he been watching? Her mind races, but she can't find an answer. I don't belong to you, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't own me. His smile widens, but there's no warmth in it. No, Elara. You don't own me either. You're just a pawn in a much larger game. His words are a cold slap to her face, but she doesn't flinch. Then tell me the rules, Kael. Tell me what you want from me. Asterisk her voice is steady, but there's a tremor in it that she can't hide. He studies her for a long moment, his eyes dark and unreadable. Asterisk you already know the answer, Elara. You just don't want to face it. Asterisk his hand reaches out, brushing against her cheek, and for a moment, she's frozen. His touch is like fire, searing through her skin, and she can't look away. Asterisk I want you, Elara. Not as a pawn. As my wife. Asterisk the words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. My wife, the thought is a knife to her heart. Asterisk you can't just take me, Kael. I won't be your prisoner. Asterisk her voice is sharp, but it's clear that she's afraid. He steps closer, his breath warm against her ear. Asterisk you already are, Elara. You just don't see it yet. Asterisk her heart pounds in her chest, but she refuses to back down. Asterisk I won't be your prisoner. Asterisk her voice is a challenge, a defiance that makes his eyes narrow. Asterisk then run, Elara. I'll find you again. I always do. Asterisk his words are a threat, but there's something else in them, something that makes her blood run cold. Fear, he's afraid of her, too. Asterisk I'm not afraid of you, Kael. Asterisk her voice is steady, but her hands tremble at her sides. Asterisk you're afraid of me. Asterisk he doesn't answer. Instead, he steps back, his eyes dark with something she can't name. Asterisk you'll see, Elara. You'll see what I'm willing to do to keep you. Asterisk his voice is a promise, and she knows he'll follow through. The door creaks open behind her, and she turns, her heart pounding in her chest. Asterisk you can't run, Elara. I'll find you again. Asterisk his voice is a whisper, but it's clear enough for her to hear. She doesn't look back. She can't. She runs, her heels pounding against the marble floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The limo is just ahead, its doors open, the driver waiting. She stumbles inside, her hands trembling as she clutches the wedding invitation to her chest. Her eyes are red. Her cheeks streaked with tears, but she doesn't stop. Asterisk I won't be your prisoner, Kael. I won't. Asterisk the thought is a fire in her veins, driving her forward. The limo doors slam shut, and the engine roars to life. The city blurs outside the window, a blur of lights and shadows. Her hands grip the invitation, her nails digging into the gilded paper. Asterisk I won't be your prisoner. Asterisk the words are a mantra, a promise she makes to herself. The limo lurches forward, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk I won't be your prisoner. Asterisk the thought is a fire in her veins, but it's not enough. She needs to escape. She needs to find the truth. Asterisk I have to know what he's hiding. Asterisk the thought is a scream trapped in her throat, but it's clear enough for her to hear. Asterisk I have to know why he wants me. Asterisk the limo's engine roars, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk I have to know the truth. Asterisk. The limo lurches forward, the city blurring into a haze of lights and shadows. Elara's fingers are still clenched around the wedding invitation, her nails digging into the gilded paper as if it might anchor her to reality. The driver's voice is a low murmur from the front, but she doesn't hear a word. Her mind is a storm, her thoughts a cacophony of questions and fears. Asterisk what debt? What game is he playing? Asterisk the words echo in her mind, but the answers elude her. Why does he want me? The question burns in her chest, a fire that refuses to be extinguished. She stares at the invitation, her silver-gray eyes reflecting the dim light of the limo's interior. Asterisk Elara Voss and Kael Thorne. Asterisk the words are a curse, a taunt. She can't believe it. He wants me to be his wife, the thought is a knife to her heart. But why? Her hands tremble as she sets the invitation down on the seat beside her. Asterisk I won't be his prisoner. Asterisk the words are a mantra, but they don't feel like a promise anymore. They feel like a lie. What if I am? The thought is a whisper, but it's clear enough for her to hear. What if I've already lost? The limo swerves, and the city outside blurs into a haze of lights and shadows. Her breath comes in shallow gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the thought is a scream trapped in her throat, but it's clear enough for her to hear. She reaches for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dials a number. Asterisk, hello? Yes, I need to speak to someone. Now. Asterisk, her voice is steady, but there's a tremor in it that she can't hide. Asterisk, I need answers. Asterisk, the words are a plea, but the person on the other end of the line doesn't answer immediately. Asterisk, please, I need to know what he's hiding. Asterisk, her voice is a whisper, but it's clear enough for her to hear. Asterisk, I won't be his prisoner. Asterisk, the words are a promise, but she knows it's a lie. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the thought is a fire in her veins, but it's not enough. The limo lurches forward, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the words are a mantra, but they don't feel like a promise anymore. They feel like a curse. Asterisk, I won't be his prisoner. Asterisk, the thought is a scream trapped in her throat, but it's clear enough for her to hear. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the limo's engine roars, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the words are a fire in her veins, but they don't feel like a promise anymore. They feel like a curse. Asterisk, I won't be his prisoner. Asterisk, the thought is a scream trapped in her throat, but it's clear enough for her to hear. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the limo lurches forward, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the words are a fire in her veins, but they don't feel like a promise anymore. They feel like a curse. Asterisk, I won't be his prisoner. Asterisk, the thought is a scream trapped in her throat, but it's clear enough for her to hear. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the limo's engine roars, and the city fades into the distance. Asterisk, I have to know the truth. Asterisk, the words are a fire in her veins, but they don't feel like a promise anymore. They feel like a curse. Elara sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the wedding invitation crumpled in her fist, its golden seal glinting like a curse. The room was a tomb of silence, cold marble floors, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the scent of expensive linen that couldn't mask the metallic tang of her own fear. She stared at the file Kael had slammed onto her desk, its contents a dagger to her ribs. Elara Voss, bride of Kael Thorne. The words blurred as tears welled, but she blinked them away. Not here. Not now. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper, each letter a taunt. Why? The question echoed in her skull, a hollow drumbeat. Memories surfaced unbidden, her mother's whisper, asterisk, the Thorns don't forgive, Elara. They consume. Asterisk, she had dismissed it as superstition, a folk tale to scare children. Now, the truth clawed at her lungs. The hotel window reflected her face, pale, haunted, the silver-gray eyes wide with a terror she couldn't name. A knock. Her breath hitched. Not again. She scrambled to her feet, her heels clacking against the floor as she lunged for the door. The handle trembled in her grip. Asterisk, don't open it. Don't asterisk, but the knock came again, slower this time, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Her hand hovered, her pulse a war drum in her ears. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of her own sweat. She could almost hear his voice, cold, commanding, asterisk, you don't run from me, Elara. Asterisk, her stomach lurched. The door creaked open. A shadow filled the threshold. His silhouette was unmistakable, broad shoulders, the sharp angles of his face lit by the hallway's flickering light. Kael Thorne stood there, his shirt torn at the collar, a jagged gash across his cheekbone, blood trickling down his jaw. His eyes, dark, unrelenting, locked onto hers. You left the file on the desk, he said, his voice a low rumble. Asterisk, you read it. Asterisk, the words hung between them, heavy with implication. Elara's throat tightened. She could feel the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of his blood and something else, something raw, something human. Her knees threatened to buckle. What is he doing here? She wanted to scream, but her voice was trapped, frozen in her chest. Kael stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. Asterisk, you don't run from me, Elara. Asterisk, the words were a promise, a threat. And she was too broken to move. Elara's breath comes in ragged shards, her fingers still curled around the edge of the hotel bed where Kael had collapsed hours ago. The scent of charred wood and iron fills the air, mingling with the acrid tang of his blood. His body lies sprawled across the floor, one hand clutching the file that had shattered her world, the one naming her as his bride. She stares at it, her reflection fractured in the darkened glass of the window, her silver-gray eyes mirroring the fire that now consumes the city. Why does he want me? The question loops in her mind, a siren's song that refuses to be silenced. Her pulse throbs in time with the distant wail of sirens, each beat a reminder of the choice she must make. Kael stirs, his voice a hoarse whisper, "You don't have to run anymore, Elara." His words are a blade, cutting through her resolve. She steps over him, her bare feet pressing into the cold tile, and reaches for the file. The paper feels brittle in her hands, as if it might disintegrate at her touch. Outside, the fire spreads, consuming the skyline in a cascade of gold and crimson. Her mind races, her heart a war drum. Asterisk, he's hunted my family before. He's hunted me. But why now? Asterisk, the answer eludes her, slipping through her fingers like smoke. She turns back to him, her voice trembling. Why me? Kael's eyes flutter open, his gaze locking onto hers. There's no deceit in his expression, only raw, unfiltered truth. Because you're the only one who can break the curse. The words hang between them, heavy with meaning. The fire roars louder, as if the city itself is demanding an answer. Elara's hands tremble as she grips the file, her mind warring with her heart. She could leave, flee into the chaos, but the fire has already claimed her. She steps closer to him, her breath unsteady. What curse? Kael's lips curve into a faint, broken smile. The one that binds us. The words are a revelation, a confession. Her pulse quickens. Bound, the thought sends a shiver through her. She looks down at the file, then back at him. You don't have to do this, she whispers. You don't have to choose me. Kael's laugh is a broken thing, raw with something she can't name. I already have. His hand reaches for hers, his fingers brushing against her wrist. The fire outside grows brighter, casting shadows that dance across the walls. Elara's heart pounds, her mind a storm of questions and fear. But as she looks into his eyes, she feels something shift, a surrender, a choice. She takes his hand, her fingers entwining with his. The fire roars, and the world falls away. The balcony is a precipice, the city a living inferno below. Elara's hand is still entwined with Kael's, their fingers interlaced as if they are already bound. The wind tears at her hair, carrying the scent of smoke and something older, something primal. She steps forward, her bare feet finding purchase on the cold stone. Kael follows, his body leaning into hers, his breath warm against her ear. You don't have to do this, she murmurs, her voice trembling. You don't have to tie yourself to me. His hands grip her waist, his thumbs brushing against the curve of her hips. I want to, he says, his voice a low rumble. I want to tie myself to you, Elara. I want to burn with you. The words send a shiver through her, a mixture of fear and something deeper, something she can't name. The fire below roars, the city's skyline a tapestry of gold and crimson. She turns to face him, her silver-gray eyes locked onto his. What does that mean? She asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Kael's gaze is unflinching, his expression a mixture of desperation and something else, something she can't quite place. It means I'm not the hunter anymore, he says. I'm the hunted. And I'm not running. The words hang between them, heavy with meaning. Elara's heart pounds in her chest, her mind a storm of questions. Then why now, she asks. Why me? Kael's hands tighten on her waist, his fingers digging into her skin. Because you're the only one who can break the curse, he repeats. Because you're the only one who can save us. His voice is raw, his words a plea. Elara's breath catches in her throat. Save us, the thought is a revelation, a spark that ignites something deep within her. She looks down at their entwined hands, at the fire that consumes the city. What happens if I say no, she asks. Kael's expression darkens, his jaw tightening. Then I burn, he says simply. And I take you with me. The words are a warning, a promise. Elara's heart pounds, her mind racing. He's willing to die for me, the thought sends a shiver through her. She steps closer to him, her body pressed against his. Then I choose you, she whispers. I choose you, even if it means burning with you. Kael's eyes widen, his expression a mixture of relief and something else, something raw and unfiltered. He pulls her into his arms, his lips pressing against hers in a kiss that is both desperate and tender. The fire roars, the city falls away, and the world is nothing but the two of them, bound in a pact that will change everything. The study is a tomb of memories, the air thick with the scent of ash and old parchment. Elara and Kael stand at the threshold, their hands still entwined, their bodies leaning into each other as if the world might collapse if they let go. The wedding plans lie in pieces on the floor, the ink smudged by smoke, the paper curling at the edges. Kael's eyes scan the remnants, his expression unreadable. It's all here, he says, his voice low. Every detail of the pact. Every clause. Every curse. Elara steps forward, her fingers brushing against the shattered pages. What does it say, she asks, her voice trembling. Kael's hands tighten on hers. That we're bound by blood and fire, he says. That our souls are tied to this contract, and that the only way to break it is to choose each other. His words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Elara's heart pounds, her mind a storm of questions. What happens if we don't choose each other, she asks. Kael's expression darkens. Then we burn, he says simply. Together. The words are a revelation, a promise. Elara's breath catches in her throat. Together, the thought sends a shiver through her. She looks up at him, her silver-gray eyes locked onto his. Then I choose you, she whispers. I choose you, even if it means burning with you. Kael's eyes widen, his expression a mixture of relief and something else, something raw and unfiltered. He pulls her into his arms, his lips pressing against hers in a kiss that is both desperate and tender. The fire roars, the city falls away, and the world is nothing but the two of them, bound in a pact that will change everything. The last paragraph of the chapter ends with the sound of distant sirens, the flames licking at the edges of the study, and Elara's whispered words, I choose you. The fire roars, and the world falls away.